All right. Well, let's get started, everyone. I see, let me just bring another few people on here. So you're going to have control to just mute and unmute yourself. So by all means, we want to keep this as interactive as possible. That's the purpose of this. We are really here to just kind of bring the group together. So, we don't have all the answers on everything. This is really just about bringing people who are all kind of dealing with the same challenges together and, sharing some ideas. I think everyone's gotten a lot of value the last few weeks about hearing what questions others have, how they're thinking about some of the challenges, and probably most usefully, just what they're doing with their own organizations right now to address some of those things. So I'm going to just do a quick round of intros, and then I'm going to kick it over to Ruth, who is going to drive today. She's got a number of questions that were submitted ahead of time. A few of those might be directed at specific people, but really mostly Gabe and I. But by all means, this is, again, for everyone. So please jump in. There is a raise hand feature. We've got about 40 people on the call right now. So it might be, if you're having a hard time jumping in, just, because you don't want to talk over other people or anything, just use the raise hand and we'll try to get to you, because it might be a little bit easier that way. But that's not necessary, just an option. So with that said, let's do a quick round of intros here. So I'm Chris Knutson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Team Genius. I know many of you are familiar with us, but we do player evaluation software for youth sports tryouts, camps, player feedback, tracking development history over time, those kinds of things. So I've got a couple others from my team here. Gabe Skelly is our customer success manager. So he has been with us. He was one of our first employees, actually, and takes care of our customers. So he, trains people, gets people, kind of manages the relationship with the company and that sort of thing. Of course, being in that role, Gabe talks to tons of organizations and everyone from coaches to directors and everywhere in between. So he's here because he can share a lot of, what he's hearing, what some of our customers are doing, what they're seeing in their communities, and that sort of thing. Additionally, we've got Ruth Nicholson. Ruth is also part-time for Team Genius. She's kind of, wears a lot of hats. She works on Gabe's team in customer success, training customers, and she's also really a youth sports consultant or alchemist, I believe many have called her in the past. But she also runs her own company called Go, which is governance and operations, and has worked with probably several people on the call in that capacity, just kind of doing organizational leadership, operations, management, those kinds of things. So without further ado, I think the last thing to comment on is, again, just the format here. This is totally open. So there's a loose agenda with some questions that were submitted and that we have that we know many of you are wondering about. But again, please throw in your own questions, throw it into the chat, jump into the conversation, raise your hand, whatever you're comfortable with. But this is really, for all of us who are kind of in this situation together and figuring it out. So let's turn it over to Ruth, who can maybe get us started with our first question today.
Right. Welcome. So hopefully you have found the chat box and found the raised hand. Make sure if you put your cursor down towards the bottom of the page, that bar will come across and you'll see where the chat, the raise hand, where those things are. We had questions come in in four chunks, sort of topic areas. One had to do with online meetings. One had to do with your membership and participation in your sport and in your club, in your organization. A lot of questions about refunds and finances, and we'll pick on Chris for a little bit and get your ideas about what you're doing in your community with your sport. And then we actually had some questions about evaluations, and Gabe is our resident expert on that. The first one I wanted to kick off just real quickly, there's a question about suggestions about online meetings and voting, things like staff meetings, annual general meetings, things like that. And looking for a recommendation for a platform to do that on. This is one of them. This is Zoom. But my recommendation to you all, if you're looking at online meetings, is to actually not start with the tool, but start with what you need to do. So what kind of meeting is it that you need to hold? What do you need to accomplish? Is it sharing information? Is it talking through a situation? Is it making a decision? And then how many people do you expect? Is it a small bunch of people, or is it a whole, 100 people, a large bunch of people like at an annual general meeting? And the third is for your activities, if you need polling or voting or something like that to take action. Once you're clear on those, then choosing a format is going to be a lot easier because there are a lot of different features in the formats. Typically, your meetings, your platforms that will do meetings are for fewer people. You can see their faces easily and manage that. If you're looking at 50, 100 or more, you really need a webinar kind of platform instead of a meeting platform. And that's just a people management thing. As it gets more complicated. The good news is that the webinar formats, like what we're using here, offer polling. Most of them offer a polling function. So if you have to take a vote, you can set that up within that platform. Couple quick recommendations. If you're doing it, have somebody who does content and worries about the meeting and the agenda. Have somebody else who's worrying about the technology. So you really have two facilitators going on. And I am blessed because I have both Gabe and Chris. So somebody to watch your technology, somebody to do your content. You're going to shoot for as good a meeting as you can. But in the online world, it's really hard to nail perfection. We have kids, we have dogs, we have housemates. Don't get so uptight about perfect that you lose the fact that you can, in fact, communicate and get stuff done. If you can have your meeting not at the top of the hour, people will be able to dial in easier. The infrastructure for phone calls, conference calls, online meetings, the top of the hour is the hardest time to dial in. So if you can stagger that 10 minutes or 20 minutes off the hour, it'll be easier. And finally, online meetings are really tiring. They're hard on your mind. They're actually hard on your body. Make sure you're taking a break in an online meeting every hour. Don't go longer than 90 minutes without letting people take a break. And the meeting will go slower. You won't get quite as much done in that hour as you would if you were sitting in a room together. In the chat, an annual general meeting, you've got voting that's required to elect directors. In that case, having that polling option can help you. The thing is, the polling option will hit for every login. So if I had Gabe and Chris in my living room and all three of us were logged in one place, we'd actually only get one vote for that particular poll. So be aware of that particular quirk if who's allowed to vote is a concern. Breathe. I tried to cram too much into 5 minutes. If you have other questions, feel free to put them in chat, raise your hand. I'm going to go ahead and move on so you don't have to listen to me. There were a bunch of questions around your members, participation in your sport, how to guess at who's going to register and what's going to happen. There were a couple of questions about how do you tell if you're going to lose people because either the situation chases them away, their finances preclude participating, maybe they've lost a job and they've got a different focus. So the question I want to throw out is, what are you seeing in terms of trends for registration? What does registration look like where you are right now?
Is there a broad audience, or is it just one person?
There's a lot of people on here.
Yeah,
there are a lot of people on there.
50
okay,
people on. Yep.
Got it. So we can't necessarily see. So I don't. This is Robert Mays, the president of Great Neck Soccer Club. We've been working with Team Genius for the last year. So appreciate the opportunity, appreciate the invite. And our registration, probably like a lot of people, starts probably right after the Christmas holiday. So registration for soccer league activities, at least in New York, typically are January, February, the latest. So that whole process goes through. And so for the travel program, everyone's registered, and we're working through the best model to keep people active until we get either clarity from our leagues as to what they're going to end up doing, or in circumstances with certain parents, if there are financial difficulties, we take it on a case-by-case basis. But right now, we've got registrants, and we're running live remote training sessions to keep the kids active until we hear from New York State and then our leagues as to what the situation will ultimately be for the spring season. We're waiting till the end of April to make any formal decisions, formal announcements. And obviously, we don't, like everyone else, until we get clarity from the leagues, we've said we're not canceling, we're not refunding, we're not crediting, but we will, obviously, if we get to the point where things are fully canceled. We're obviously also trying to take care of our training staff, because there's a lot of people employed by the club that support our various teams. It's a trainer-oriented model where there's a trainer assigned for every team in the club, and so we're also trying to do the right thing by as many people as we can. It's a balancing act. There's probably no right or wrong way, but we're taking it day by day and week by week, and hopefully we'll be coming to some conclusion in the next few weeks.
Yeah, Roland, you had your hand up. What's on your mind?
So I was one of the people who put in this question just to kind of pick everyone's brain. So my name is Roland Sierra. I'm the general manager with Kitchener Minor Hockey Association. We're approximately a 140 team league or association. We play in various leagues: girls, boys, rep house league, special hockey, learn to play, all that sort of stuff. So one of the things that concerns me is twofold. One, parents being able to afford, which I think we can answer together. So I'm trying to gauge what the rest of the community is thinking about supporting our programs through government incentives, working together. I know that they're spending a ton of money right now, but that's going to continue afterwards, I believe, and we're going to need to chase them as a group to say, the facilities that we pay for need to come down in price, need to accommodate the fact that people have been off work and have been living with a less than reasonable income for an extended period of time en masse. So just wondering from all those out here, and probably have two very different answers, one from the States and one from Canada, as to what that might look like. Is anybody starting to get those thoughts in their head? And then I guess the second phase that we can discuss after would be the other people who won't return will be those who are afraid of the human contact for the duration till a vaccine comes out. And I'm not sure any of us can really find an answer for that psychological question. It's just going to have to be something we live with. So I was just curious as to what others are thinking and planning to do, because the stuff I'm reading from Sport Canada and from other large-scale marketing groups is saying don't just spend money for the sake of spending money, because the customer is not going to be there. You need to be more constructive with how you're reaching out to people.
Yeah, we have a couple of folks who've typed in the chat. James is saying they're not sure what they're going to do at this time. They're in communication with all of their players, but they're looking for ways to lower their player cost for fall 2020. And Jennifer says, sure, they're gearing up to open registration on May 15th for the hockey season, which typically starts in late August. We're hoping to make adjustments to our typical policies to ease the financial strain for our members. There's a possible extension on payment plans and perhaps a lower deposit.
Awesome. That's similar stuff to what we're planning within our control. Anybody thinking outside of their organization, how they might approach? I know we've already put in a request to our municipality to, when this remotely opens up and we may be able to play again, discuss the cost of ice going forward. We're also in discussions with soccer and a few of the other larger groups in our area to have a unified approach across recreational facilities. Anybody else coordinating on that level?
Ideas? Shane, do you have something?
Hello.
Hello. Is anybody coordinating with their local governments or other sports in your area to address things in a coordinated kind of fashion?
I'm sorry, I just cut out.
Oh dear, here you're back. We can hear you now.
Okay, I'm sorry. What was the question?
The question was, are people finding ways to coordinate either with their local governments, parks departments, or other sports in their area to sort of figure out how to move forward as a community, not just a lone sports organization?
Yeah, I in my organization, I haven't been the one in charge of those conversations, but our executive director has been, of course, in all those conversations. So I do know that that's going on a daily basis, and he's updating the staff. So we're just getting updates as to, what's going on with those discussions.
Thank you. The other sort of corollary set of questions that came in, a lot of people worried about cash flow, registration, refunds, credits. What do you do? Is it appropriate to ask parents to request a refund? Do you just offer a refund? What are the options here? And I'm going to put Chris on the spot and ask him to talk a little bit about what he's hearing clubs doing in terms of refunds and credits, and the questions to ask when you're trying to grapple with that question. Chris, what do you know?
Yeah, well, I don't know much, but it's definitely not an easy question, and there's no one answer to this either. So what I'll try to do is just again share, like you said, Ruth, what we're hearing some organizations do, maybe a couple of ideas, and I'd love to hear what others are doing. Some of what I'm sharing is more, hey, here's what we're trying. Here's a theory, an idea. I don't know how well a lot of this stuff is working for people, but I mean, ultimately, this is, if there's ever a time, there are lots of times, but if there's ever a time to really think about your organization as a business first and foremost, I think this is it. You have to be thinking about it that way. And it's, some people don't like we're all trying to provide a place for kids to play, and that's not going to change. That's important. But if you want to survive, you have to be thinking about it from a business standpoint. And, a lot of that comes down to, if you have to refund across the board, I mean, that can be crushing and really bankrupt a huge number of organizations. So offering refunds entirely is really a non-option in a lot of cases. And so I think instead what we're hearing is a good number of organizations trying to find alternatives to that. And a couple of those could be certainly credits for a following season or following year, depending on, maybe you have a fall season, so your spring season, or looking to next year. You could also look at even staggering that for people who really do want refunds. You may or may not get refunded on the credit card processing fees or your registration fees. Most likely you won't. So you may be able to say, hey, we're going to refund a percentage, or, maybe we'll give you a 50% refund, or, 100% credit for next year. So you sort of entice those families with a credit rather than a full refund. I think, obviously refund is probably the worst case for you as a business. So you have to think about, is there a way we can create alternative programming? So we've seen a lot of organizations who are saying, hey, we might not have a season this year in the traditional sense, but our players still want to train. They still want to be active. They still want to stay engaged in the game. So we need to find, other ways to kind of fill that need in their lives. And that could be remote training. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I know that was one of the questions. It could be, there's organizations just kind of trying to maintain, if nothing else, the community of their sport, the teams interacting with each other. We've heard, I know on this call a couple weeks ago, there was a bit of a good conversation on using Slack and actually having, the players interacting with each other and doing kind of, virtual events or, a FIFA tournament, all sorts of things like that. So it is not the traditional, season, but if you're able to provide some sort of value, that's a way to justify at least a portion of your fee, if not all of it. And, there's a lot of ways to go about that. I think maybe the last point here I'll add before I want to hear what others are doing is the idea of just kind of being transparent and going to those parents. Of course, not everyone can afford to hand over their fee for nothing in return or less than they originally paid for. People are losing their jobs, and obviously we need to be sensitive and generous with those people. They deserve that. But if there's an opportunity where a parent can afford it, which is a good percentage of them, it's really just kind of coming clean with, hey, if we give refunds, here's what this means for the organization. And saying, really, if we want to be here next year when it's safe to play again or whenever that is. And in order to do that, we need some of this cash now. And so I actually just got off the phone this morning with one of our customers at Arete Lacrosse, Corey Childs, and he went to, his program's a little bit different. They own several teams. They do, camps and kind of have ongoing programming for families with kind of, mentorship around recruiting and that sort of thing. And, he started getting some requests to cancel monthly memberships from parents. And he literally just told them, hey, if, I need this money right now for the cash flow, but I will do these things in return. He created a podcast. He started doing webinars for those families even more than he already was, and made it super relevant to what those families are going through now. And I think he only had, of the hundreds of families he works with, he had 10 actually asked for refunds. And I think he was telling me that all 10 of those had lost their jobs. So it was a different, for them, absolutely, like that's the right thing to do. But being transparent about the situation you're in as a business and that you are trying to do the best you can to remain open and around into the future, I think that goes a long way with people.
What are others doing when it comes to requests for refunds, credits, changing your programming to fill in this unusual time?
This is James Hope from San Antonio. I'm the vice president of Alamara Youth Soccer, and one of the things we voted on last week was to help our Division II teams and our academy programs. That since we didn't have a spring season and it's now all been canceled here in Texas, or for the most part, we are rolling over their team fees for next year, and then offering them a discount, no fees for the spring as well as next year. So all team fees that we charge for each club will be zero. And then we'll still have our administrative fees of $4 per player, but that's all we're going to be asking for them to contribute, which was about $150 for the 2 seasons. So that's going to save our clubs a little bit of money because we do expect a lot of people to be suffering. Especially here in San Antonio and our inner city programs. And so we definitely know it's going to be a problem. So that's one way, because, we've already kind of allocated the money for our projects that we're setting up for the spring. And so so we're just going to roll those things over and stretch them out and work on some of those government grants that we already are a part of.
Right. I've got Carol and Justin. Carol, where are you?
I'm on audio, but not video.
There you are. Okay, there you are.
My name's Carol. I'm the executive director for Fraser Valley Volleyball Association up in British Columbia, Canada.
Are you still there with us?
Me?
Oh, you faded out there for a minute.
Okay, am I back on now?
You're back. Glad to hear you.
Okay, so we are in a different position. Our season runs from December until May, so we've been cut off kind of halfway through the season, beginning of March. And essentially we've been told now our national championships and provincial championships that would happen in May have been canceled. So we do have families asking for refunds, but most of our expenses have already been paid out. So the only thing left that we can really leverage for refunds is our unused facility costs. Some are prepaid, so we're waiting for refunds to come back on those, as well as the events that have been canceled. We're going to get refunds for those. So we've made a commitment to our families to refund that portion, but it's really a small portion of their overall fees, which I think some of them have said, hey, we've lost half our season, so we expect we're getting half our funds back. And we've had to educate them on, what's actually already a hard cost that's been paid out. One thing we did do with our national championships is we specifically went back to our club and invited those teams, and we have 18 teams, and we invited them to consider donating just their portion of the national championship fee, which is about $60, $65 per player, to an initiative that we started to fund meals for our frontline workers at our local hospitals. So we have 3 hospitals that are close, that our athletes service, Surrey, Langley, and Abbotsford, and we have been able to provide some meals to those ER and critical care units in each of those hospitals. So that's been well received. We invited each of our families to reach out privately if they couldn't do that or didn't want to participate. And I really, out of 210 families, we had about 20 who said, look, we just can't do it. We need ours back. So we're like, no problem. We'll get that back to you when we can give the rest. So it's just an easy way to maybe turn people's attention from the negative and disappointment of our championships being canceled to, hey, we can actually make a difference to people who are putting their lives on the line, and it's way beyond sport.
I'm in Washington State, and we were really fond of our neighbors to the north. I've got a comment from Bobby Capewell. We echo what Chris said. Everyone has to be creative with their overall decision making. I agree there needs to be a business mindset in our thinking. And I also think we have to have a nonprofit mindset and come up with creative solutions based upon each individual club or organization philosophy. I like what James Hope had to say. Push people's payments to next season, but keep administrative fees in order. Great idea. I've not heard anyone voice that idea yet. Jennifer says, we gave teams the option to donate their canceled tournament fees to BC Children's Hospital and are donating over $11,000.
Wow.
Yeah, BC rocks. Question from Justin. Justin Mays, how are you taking care of your training staff? How are clubs taking care of your training staff? Anyone?
I think we had a hand up too, Ruth. I think Troy had his hand up.
Did Troy have his hand up? Troy, I'm sorry, I missed you.
Yes, that's right.
Jump in here, Troy.
Well,
Glad to have you.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I'm Troy Pearson with the Positive Coaching Alliance, and kind of what Chris and Bobby were mentioning, what we're hearing from all kinds of associations and groups and leaders on the refunds, or how do we manage our people who are expecting dollars back because they're not having the services or season. And I agree with Chris, and we're hearing this over and over, that there is a business component of it, and finding that intricate way to let them know that you need the funds to continue what they're doing, and to maybe pivot in how you explain things to them, that you want to be set when we, and this has been a key word we've been hearing over and over, when we emerge from this. So when you're, whatever sport you have, when we emerge from this COVID situation, we want to be ready to serve you as a family, your kids, because it's going to be a traumatic time perhaps, and we want this to be ready for you. And so we need to keep this moving for when we emerge. And the second part, I would say, to help you on that is to create with them some social currency. It sounds bad, but you as an association want to look good in their eyes to justify to them anyway, keeping their money with you. And so whether that's training or doing webinars for coaches or parents, how to manage, providing them resources, I think it's those two approaches we've been hearing from lots of organizations and associations to let their teams and their parents and families know that we want to emerge from this healthy for you, and that to try to create some social currency to keep them involved and active so they see that you're relevant in this current time of hiatus. That brings value to them, and I think it helps trying to keep the money per se.
Thank you. Justin, you had a question about clubs taking care of their training staff.
Yeah, and this may not be applicable to everybody else. I mentioned this before. For us, we're not for profit, so the overhead that we have really is our training staff. And like anybody else, these folks are 100% of their income is typically based on their training fees. And so whether there's no season today, what we've done in the interim, I mentioned, is we're paying them for live training sessions via Zoom, at least for the month of April. We haven't figured out May, we haven't figured out June, but we're trying not to put them out on the street. That's what we're trying not to do. And it's a balancing act, obviously, because we're obviously working in some level of partnership with them to ensure that they stay employed. We don't lose them long term. That's the other consideration. Some of these trainers are folks whose job depends on this. We've had one who's left completely to go work for Amazon doing delivery because they're making more money in that capacity. So I think the landscape will definitely change in terms of training staff and that side of the house. And for us, we're just trying to do the right thing by as many people as we can, both the folks who are involved in the program as well as the people that we pay to provide training to the teams that are part of the club. So I'm just curious what other ideas are out there that people are potentially leveraging.
How are you taking care of your staff? Anyone? Yeah. Rob Marino.
Hi.
Hi, glad you're here.
Me too. So we are continuing to pay our staff. We're a soccer organization. I know some organizations pay their staff, per session or per game or whatever it is. But we've always operated on a model of a set stipend every month, to cover all of the team's games and practices. So we are continuing to pay them. My original thought was to apply for one of those PPP loans through the CARES Act, to, I guess, either help out or, although we're continuing to pay them, be able to use that money so that if parents request refunds down the road, we'd be able to pay the refunds through there and sort of cancel out a little bit. But unfortunately, all of our trainers are 1099 independent contractors. They're not W-2 employees. And so I guess in one of the late iterations or modifications of the act, they took out the ability to cover for 1099 employees. They have to be W-2. They expect the 1099 employees to apply on their own for PPP benefits. So my plan of being able to use that to help subsidize, flatline, but we're still continuing to pay them, and we still have them doing things on a regular basis. So all of our teams are doing twice weekly Zoom sessions with their teams and their coach. So They're getting together, they're having, a little bit of social time, they're talking soccer and talking strategy and talking life, and maybe integrating 15, 20 minutes of soccer activity just to help keep the kids active. We also have the training staff contributing to our virtual platform that we created on our website. So they've been doing blog posts and creating videos and that sort of stuff. So we're trying to still keep the coaches engaged and have them, maybe for lack of a better word, justify continuing to be paid. And then, the hope is that if we get to a point where parents are asking for refunds, that we are able to, as I guess some of the other speakers had said, be able to kind of justify, why we can't provide full refunds. I think, we're going to head the credit route to give us time to kind of recoup as an organization, because to have to shell out hundreds and hundreds of dollars per player across the organization would just be financially debilitating. So that's kind of how we're handling it all, for what it's worth. Hope that helps.
For me, it does. I will add one more thing that might be helpful for you, just as we're talking about the topic. So with our training staff, we've agreed to, so the Zoom sessions you're running are 2 45-minute sessions per week, very similar to what you're doing. They're typically paid for hour-and-a-half sessions. Obviously, they've got games as well that they're not being paid for today, just for the training. But we've talked about incorporating maybe in the fall. They'll credit us back some of the hours against sessions, or add maybe an additional session per week to make up for the compensation today. So it kind of balances out between one season, the spring, obviously, and the fall. That's something we're working with the training staff on.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I know here there's been some talk about the leagues pushing their season into the summer. And typically we don't pay the trainers in the summer because they're not working. So I think along those lines, we may ask them to either handle the summer gratis because they've been paid for doing less work now, or pay them something less in the summer than they would normally get, despite the fact that they're, carrying a full load in the summer. So, I like your idea as well. We're all going to have to be a little creative here, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
So a little different take on helping staff. Question from Dallery. Are any clubs including coach professional development during this time? Using this time to help your coaches improve? Anyone?
I know at our club, sorry.
Nope, you go first.
Go, Shane,
Okay.
and then we'll go to Roland.
I know at our club, the board decided to halt all coaches' education funding for a little while, just to save money. That's just sharing that information.
Roland?
So we've made, I'm going to say, a similar and yet completely opposite decision. So we've agreed we're not spending money currently, and this would be our off season to train our coaches. But rather we're leaning on our connections throughout the hockey community to ask for people to educate our coaches on them. So we're reaching out to our NHL players, our NHL coaches, the people who've come through our system, and other people to lean back towards our current coaches and host Zoom meetings or Teams meetings and get people reconnected to have smaller hot topic conversations instead of larger scale kind of seminar meetings. And that way it's not taking up as much of their personal time to plan, but rather they're still giving their influence and connecting in a very meaningful way. We do carry 4 full-time permanent staff. We carry some other part-time occasional staff that are contract-based. And so one of the things that we're doing, looking at the big picture, is we're leaning on our reserves. So one of the things I encourage groups, if you didn't have it coming into this, hopefully it's something you see the necessity to have coming out, have dollars set aside. We made sure we had enough. It was always our rainy day scenario that if for something were to ever shut us down mid-season, we'd have enough to pay staff out to the end of the season before we laid them off, and then they'd have time to go on and look for other things. So we had or have in reserve about $500,000 to cover staff wages and any of those shutdown costs if we ever needed them. Now, we're not looking at that, but I think business, we talked earlier in the comments about, being business minded. Any private business would have reserves. They would have rainy day contingencies, and a lot of not-for-profits don't. They operate day to day. What would happen if we had to shut down? Oops. I think that's something we have to change. We have to make sure we operate with those reserves to care for those people who are in our care. And we are very blunt about it with our people. When we say there's a surcharge to feed our reserves if we ever eat into them for any reason. So for example, about 12 years ago, we helped our municipality build a building. And so we put a surcharge on our registration of $15 per person for almost 10 to 15 years. And of that, $3 went to reserves. The remainder went to the building fund. And then we ate some of our reserves to cover what our commitment didn't cover from our building fund. And we slowly built those reserves back up. But we identify it in our audit every single year. We're transparent with our people as to why it's there. And it's less than 1/3 of our annual operating. So it's not like we're crazy and have this obscene amount of money. We're a fairly large hockey organization, not as big as a lot of the soccer clubs, even in Canada. I know everybody thinks our hockey clubs are the biggest, but soccer by number still is. When we look at those things, I think we really need to adapt some different models, and that'll help us come out strong. I know we have parents asking for a refund despite there only having been 2 weeks left in our season. So what we're doing is, rather than add back to our fund at the end of the year, we are actually going to take whatever we make and divide it equally amongst our parents next year as a rebate to lessen the cost and hopefully ease them back into hockey as much as we can.
Thank you. We've got some comments here in the chat. Shelley says we are working through our normal off-season planning with a bit of a twist due to the unknown return to play. Carol, we have surveyed for as many free professional development opportunities out there. There's several Facebook live feeds, The Art of Coaching, Gold Medal Squared, etc. James says there's lots of free soccer coaching going on now at the Soccer Summit Coaches Clinic. I can attest to that. We know some folks who've presented there. I'm going to yeah, I did that Wednesday. Gosh, it's Friday already. What I'm noticing is that folks are putting some references and resources here in the chat. And so I'm going to challenge us at Team Genius to take those references and stick them in the email that we send out after this, so that people have them and don't have to scroll through the chat. We can pull those out. Bobby has said that the CARES Act hasn't helped his small club, but the National Youth Soccer Council and Active Policy Solutions are lobbying Congress for youth sports to be taken into account. And he's got a link there. Do you know anything about that effort, Chris, in terms of youth sports and trying to get assistance for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of two pieces to this. And actually, that article is really good. And we actually supported that as a company. So I was able to connect with them, put our name, Team Genius, behind, and actually share an impact statement. So who knows, but hope it helps. But yeah, there's really two components. One is just for, literally just monetary relief. But then the other piece is actually to kind of help fund the operations around return to play, and how do we actually kind of come together on what that's going to look like, and policies, and making sure we do it safely, but also kind of as swiftly as we realistically and safely can. So no, it seems like a really good, it's backed by a lot of organizations. I know Sports Engine, Team Snap, Triple Crown Sports, some pretty big guys out there have backed this. And that's about all I know. If anyone else knows, anything in particular, I believe there is a way to get involved at your club. I think we I know TeamSnap wrote a blog post with the contact information for the person who's kind of heading this up, and I actually emailed her, and that's how I got involved. So maybe that's something we can include in our follow-up email as well.
Right. Roland, is anyone expecting a change to operations coming out of this, such as a health check before play or something? What does your crystal ball say it's going to look like when we actually have kids in the gym, on the ice, on the field?
That question for me, Ruth, comes out of my second hat, and I'm sure like most of the people here, they're not just involved in one sport, they're involved in many. So while I can envision a world where hockey returns, because really it's only the most competitive levels that are full-on body checking, and all you'd simply need to say is develop a fishbowl for your helmet that really contains some of that, to quote our Prime Minister in Canada, speaking moistly stuff. That meme, you can all laugh. Gotta love it. But my kids also play rugby. And so I look at that sport and the physical nature and the physical contact coming into that. And that's actually where I'm the most afraid, because I'm also the president of our local rugby club. And I look at what our drop-off would be. That's where I'm hearing parents who are deathly afraid, literally, of putting their kids back in the sport because of the extreme close proximity and contact that players have. If you just look at a scrum, heads in, shoulders together, face to face, there's no way around it in keeping the game the same. So I'm wondering if anybody is hearing from governing bodies or from anybody else yet of some operational changes that may come out of this, expectations from our participants or anything else. I've heard nothing. So I tend to find, and one of the reasons I jumped on this call was to be with some of our American compatriots. Your sport leadership around the world is really kind of great. You guys seem to do things first. So I'm wondering if there's anything you've heard that might lead that way.
Folks who are hearing from governing bodies or your leagues. Carol, what do you have? Do you want me to read it, or do you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump in. We're expecting some limitations with respect to camps and clinics. I think what we are expecting is to see a staggered ability to meet, but in groups smaller than 25, which for us, because we're at the end of our club season, won't be an issue because our practices will be done. We've already essentially said we're no longer going to be practicing because all the competitions have been canceled, as I mentioned. But we do run programs in the summer and the fall for younger athletes, train and play, that we would have normally anywhere from 32 to 64 in the gym. I think we're going to have to plan on smaller group sizes than that, or finding separate gyms and dividing them up so that we don't have more than, I think 25 is going to be the number to start, and then eventually it'll be 50. That's the number our government's been using up to this point. And so I think that could also impact our tryouts when we come back to them again in the fall.
Yeah, as far as I can jump in real quick on tryouts. Again, I talked to a customer earlier and have had a couple like this where, you know, the latest I'm hearing, other than certainly possibilities of trying to do remote and, you know, if you have game film and things like that, but or using previous evals. The Corey in particular I spoke with this morning is planning on, you know, just really kind of staggering that tryout process, kind of get away from, hey, we have this huge, you know, 2 weekends and we have, you know, 300 kids come in over a couple days, but instead doing it sort of spread out as, you know, hey, we're going to do groups of 10 and we have, you know, 30-minute slots, hour slots, things like that. So, you know, not ideal, but that's just kind of the way he's thinking about accomplishing as close as he can to a tryout with kind of the limitation on numbers.
Go ahead, Gabe.
I know I've heard more and more talking to customers the idea that, you know, as we come out of this, it'll be slow. And, you know, beyond tryouts, there's different ways to put kids on teams between using, you know, if you've worked with them before, between using previous season evals and doing resources you've got for seeing what they can do, training remotely, and putting them on teams based on that. But getting down to actual competition, I've talked to a handful of clubs this week in different parts of the world, thinking that it's still going to be limited to who can be in a certain area, right? So if you're going to be out playing soccer, if you're going to be playing volleyball, if you're going to be playing hockey, good chance that, parents and spectators might not be advisable to have in large groups. So more and more getting into the ability to add in live streaming to what people are doing. And I've had more conversations this week than I've had in the previous probably 2 years on that, but more and more people looking at the ability to bring parents and spectators into the games but not physically having them at the games to keep the larger crowds down.
Yeah, Jennifer says her governing body, which is Hockey Canada, has mentioned that all activities are suspended at least until June 1st.
Yeah, that's correct. We're well aware that we can't do anything hockey related until very likely the actuality will be mid-August. I'm also wondering if they're going to come out with at least the average hockey rink is built in a way that it's the hallways that are the issues as parents walk their kids to dressing rooms. I think we're going to see more strict rules around parents leave your kid at the lobby, coaches will take them to the room, that sort of thing, to create less congestion where you may not have that same level of space that you would normally have. I know through my rugby and soccer commitments that not such an issue, big open spaces, but not that they can't exist, but I know in hockey that tends to be one of our key hiccups is try and get into a dressing room in that top of the hour or bottom of the hour kind of slot, and it's just tight and chaotic. So it would surprise me if Hockey Canada doesn't come out with some guidelines regarding that as well.
James, what's San Antonio Parks doing, Parks and Rec?
We spoke with Parks and Rec before the shutdown here in Texas, and they were already discussing sanitation stations that would need to be applied, temperature checks, possibly keeping players and parents separated, like on practice days that only players could be on the field, parents would have to wait in the cars. But we don't know what to expect going forward. Most of the teams in San Antonio are using public facilities, either county or city owned. So there will definitely be restrictions that those entities are going to put on, I assume. So it's still to be determined, but these were some of the things that they were talking about prior to, the full shutdown of parks here in San Antonio.
Yeah, there's a slightly different question again from Dallery. Are any organizations looking to get supplemental virus insurance to insure coaches, staff, and their organization apart from the player insurance they get from their affiliations? I am so not an insurance expert.
I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it exists or not.
Well, it worked out for Wimbledon, didn't they? They got like £100 million payout for pandemic insurance. I think they've been paying like $2 million a year, and then it just paid out $100 million.
So, yeah, I haven't heard of that, but it wouldn't surprise me if people were nosing around about it. The last chunks of questions we got for this week, so feel free if you've got a question to make sure you stick it in the chat so we can do it. Last thought from Christina. USA Volleyball, prior to the postponing events, changed the protocol of teams shaking hands prior to and after the match. They also changed how players switch sides between games. And they're assuming that there's more change going to come in future protocols.
Our local hockey associations did the same thing. Gloves have to stay on, and it's a fist bump as opposed to a handshake. And then right before the cancellation of things, it was a head nod, not even right. And it just became an acknowledgement of sportsmanship and move on in order to maintain safety. I know that wasn't a Hockey Canada statement. That was just our local league and association that made that decision, but it wouldn't surprise me if very similar things do move up the food chain as well.
Yeah. Question from Katie. Is anyone planning to host and attend tournaments in the fall or the winter, looking forward a number of months?
We are, Ruth.
Are you?
We make over $150,000 a year on our tournaments. They're one of our primary fundraisers. We expect we won't make that level of money this year, but it is our plan to at least host them, to keep them front of mind. And unless they're canceled by our governing bodies, we already have our sanctions in forward thought that we would have them. So that's certainly our hope. I know from the players that we have that are looking to return, that was one of their big questions, and they all want to go. But I can see those who don't just having not reached out. So I'm sure the number of teams traveling will be different, as well as travel restrictions. That's the other thing I'm expecting anyways, is even by the fall. I know they're saying 30 days for the Canadian-US border. It would surprise me if it's only 30 days. So I think we'll probably see border restrictions still be limited for quite a while.
Oh, Carol, what are you seeing from BC school sports?
We haven't seen anything official. We've been reaching out to our connections through there to see what they're looking at for fall. I'm anticipating that there may be some schools that don't run their school volleyball programs, either because of delays. I work at a university, and we're expecting our season might potentially be impacted and move to a January start. So I could see some, if the high schools are impacted in the same way. As long as we can get facilities, we would then look to start our club season earlier to offer those kids the opportunity. We do partner with a lot of schools for facilities. So if we're able to get them, then we would look to start the club program.
Yeah. Facilities are an issue here in Washington in that if, for a lot of school districts, if you rent school facilities, either gym or fields, if school is not in session, you can't necessarily use the facilities at the school. So the minute here in Washington state that the schools closed, a lot of sports, not just soccer, lost their ability to train and have games. They couldn't get to the facilities. So are there any final questions that are on your mind that you want us to tackle before the top of the hour? We've got a couple of minutes. We will go back through the chat and pull out those articles and those references that people have been sticking in chat, so you can, in case you didn't capture them while they were floating by, we'll put them in our follow-up email to you, and that will also have the replay of our conversation if you want to see it again or if you want to share it with somebody. Chris, final words?
No, just thanks for the great conversation, everyone. We're going to keep doing this. So I think some of you know this maybe from a past one, but we hosted a webinar and we got a ton of good questions, and we didn't even hardly get to them all in the Q&A portion. So we're kind of like, hey, let's just do this like Friday weekly open thing and see how it goes. And that was 4 weeks ago, and we had 50 people today. So pretty cool to see everybody coming together. And again, we don't all know what we're doing. We're just figuring it out, and we're all in it together. So it's cool to share ideas and hear what people are doing. So thanks for joining.
We did have a couple of questions on specifically about how to score and evaluate players. And Gabe and I will get back to you on those specific scoring kinds of questions.
So. Yeah, if anybody that's a current customer has any questions at all, fire them over to me, email me, gabe@teamgenius.com, and I can help with anything. And, like I said, I'm talking to, tons and tons of clubs all over the world every week. What my goal right now is just to talk to everybody, see what's going on, just like this, where we learn from each other, talk about the questions and things that everybody's got going on as a challenge, and grow through this together and come on the other side, hopefully a stronger youth sports community. So if you have questions for me, reach right out to me, and I'll jump right in and help. So.
Yeah, Gabe's one of the geniuses at Team Genius. Thank you for your time, and join us next week.
Thanks everyone.